At Queen's biggest concert, a journalist suddenly jumped on stage and attacked Freddie Mercury. What happened next was something nobody expected, but what Freddie did to that journalist became one of the most legendary comebacks in all of rock history. Picture this: Manchester Apollo, November 3rd, 1984. Queen is in the middle of their most controversial tour yet, and 3,000 screaming fans are packed into one of England's most intimate venues. The energy is electric, the crowd is deafening, and everything seems to be going perfectly according to plan. But sometimes, the most legendary moments in rock history happen when everything goes completely off the rails. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell, because what you're about to witness will show you exactly why Freddie Mercury was not just a great performer, but a master of psychological warfare disguised as entertainment. Tonight, we're revealing the untold story of the Manchester incident that had music critics calling it the greatest display of quick wit ever recorded. This isn't just about handling a heckler. This is about a genius who turned a vicious attack into a masterclass in verbal destruction. The evening had started with an unusual tension in the air. Queen was promoting their latest album, which had received mixed reviews from the British music press. Several major publications had been particularly harsh, calling the band past their prime and suggesting that Freddie's theatrical style was becoming outdated and ridiculous. What the audience didn't know was that Marcus Whitfield, a music journalist from one of London's most prestigious publications, had been planning this night for weeks. Whitfield had been writing scathing reviews of Queen for years, but he felt his written attacks weren't having enough impact. He wanted to make a statement that would be impossible to ignore. Marcus Whitfield was known in journalism circles as a provocateur who believed that rock stars had become too insulated from real criticism. At 35 years old, he had built his reputation on confrontational interviews and reviews that often crossed the line from professional critique into personal attack. Earlier that day, Whitfield had published what he intended to be his final piece on Queen, titled "The Death of Rock Authenticity: How Queen Killed Music." In it, he had written particularly venomous attacks on Freddie's sexuality, his theatrical style, and what Whitfield called the band's shameless pandering to the lowest common denominator. But writing wasn't enough for Whitfield anymore. He wanted to confront Freddie Mercury face to face, in front of an audience, where the rock star couldn't hide behind his usual theatrical persona. Security guard Tom Richardson, who was working the front barrier that night, later recalled noticing something unusual about one particular audience member. There was this bloke in the third row who wasn't behaving like the other fans, Richardson remembered. He wasn't singing along, wasn't smiling, just standing there with this intense stare fixed on the stage. Something felt off about him. What Tom didn't know was that Whitfield had spent considerable effort obtaining his ticket. He'd used his press credentials to get close to the venue, then purchased a premium seat from a scalper, paying triple the face value to ensure he'd be close enough to the stage for his planned confrontation. The first hour of the concert proceeded normally. Queen powered through their biggest hits. The crowd was ecstatic, and Freddie was in his element, commanding the stage with his usual charismatic authority. But Whitfield was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came during Queen's acoustic segment, when the arena had settled into a more intimate atmosphere, and Freddie was seated at his piano, preparing to perform one of their more emotional ballads. Dr. Sarah Chen, a crowd psychology expert who happened to be attending the concert for research purposes, later analyzed what happened next. What we witnessed was a calculated attack, designed to maximize humiliation, she explained. Whitfield chose the most vulnerable moment possible, when Freddie was alone at the piano, when the crowd was quiet, when there was nowhere to hide. As Freddie began the opening notes of the ballad, Whitfield suddenly vaulted over the security barrier and sprinted toward the stage. Security personnel were caught completely off guard. This wasn't a drunk fan looking for attention, but a calculated assault by someone who clearly had a plan. "You're a fraud, Mercury," Whitfield shouted as he climbed onto the stage, his voice carrying clearly through the arena's sound system. "You're everything that's wrong with music today, and I'm here to expose you for what you really are." The crowd fell into shocked silence. 3,000 people watched in horror as this unknown man confronted their hero in what was clearly a premeditated attack. Security was scrambling to reach the stage, but Whitfield had positioned himself strategically, putting the piano between himself and the approaching guards. "You hide behind costumes and theatrics because you have nothing real to offer," Whitfield continued, pulling pulling out a folded piece of paper from his jacket. "I've written the truth about you, and now I'm going to read it to everyone here so they can see what a pathetic pretender you really are." Freddie Mercury, seated at his piano, could have easily fled the stage or called for security to remove the intruder. Instead, he did something that would become legendary in the annals of rock history. He smiled, not his usual charming stage smile, but something more predatory, more calculating. The smile of a performer who had just been handed the perfect opportunity to demonstrate exactly why he was considered one of the most quick-witted entertainers alive. "Ladies and gentlemen," Freddie announced calmly, his voice carrying that familiar theatrical authority through his microphone. "It appears we have a critic in the house tonight." The crowd began to murmur, uncertain about what was happening, but trusting their hero to handle the situation. Brian May, Roger Taylor, and John Deacon watched from their positions on stage, ready to intervene if necessary, but fascinated to see how Freddie would handle this unprecedented situation. "What's your name, darling?" Freddie asked Whitfield, his tone conversational despite the circumstances. "Marcus Whitfield," the journalist replied, clearly expecting this introduction to carry weight with the audience. "I'm a music journalist, and I'm here to tell these people the truth about what you really are." "Marcus Whitfield," Freddie repeated thoughtfully, as if considering the name. "I'm sorry, love. I don't believe I've heard of you. Are you quite sure you're a real journalist? Or did you just print some business cards at home?" The crowd erupted in laughter, and Whitfield's confident demeanor began to crack slightly. This wasn't going according to his plan. He had expected Freddie to be flustered, defensive, maybe even to flee the stage. Instead, the rock star was treating him like a mild inconvenience. "I've been writing about music longer than you've been performing," Whitfield shot back, unfolding his prepared statement. "And I'm going to read what I wrote about you so everyone here can understand what a fake you are." "Oh, how wonderful," Freddie replied, standing from his piano bench and moving closer to the journalist. "A dramatic reading. I do love theater, as you may have noticed. Please, by all means, entertain us." What happened next would be talked about in music circles for decades to come. Instead of trying to silence Whitfield or have him removed, Freddie Mercury did something completely unexpected. He gestured grandly to the audience and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special guest tonight who's prepared a performance for us. Let's give him our full attention." The crowd, following Freddie's lead, fell silent. 3,000 people focused their attention on Marcus Whitfield, who suddenly found himself in the spotlight he had thought he wanted. "Go ahead, Marcus," Freddie encouraged, settling himself on the edge of the piano to watch. "Read us your little essay. I'm particularly interested to hear what insights you have about authenticity in rock music." Whitfield, caught off guard by this unexpected cooperation, began reading from his prepared statement. But something strange started happening. As he read his carefully crafted insults and criticisms, they began to sound increasingly petty and ridiculous when spoken aloud in front of 3,000 people. "Freddie Mercury represents everything that is artificial and manufactured about modern music," he read, his voice growing less confident with each word. "His theatrical performances are nothing more than elaborate distractions from his lack of genuine musical talent." The crowd began to laugh, not at Freddie, but at Whitfield. The journalist prepared attacks, which had seemed so devastating on paper, sounded foolish and desperate when delivered in person. But Freddie wasn't finished with his psychological masterpiece. "That's fascinating, Marcus," he interrupted gently. "Tell me, how long did it take you to write that review?" "What does that matter?" Whitfield replied, clearly flustered by the unexpected question. "Well, I'm just curious," Freddie continued conversationally. "Because you see, it took me about 30 seconds to write a better song than you'll ever write a review. Would you like me to demonstrate?" Without waiting for an answer, Freddie returned to his piano and began playing an impromptu melody. Within moments, he was singing an improvised song about a poor little journalist who thinks he matters, incorporating Whitfield's name and comments into lyrics that had the entire audience in stitches. The song was clever, insulting, and absolutely devastating. More importantly, it demonstrated exactly the kind of spontaneous creativity and genuine talent that Whitfield had claimed Freddie lacked. Dr. Patricia Williams, who studied this incident extensively, later wrote about the psychological dynamics at play. What Freddie accomplished was remarkable from a strategic standpoint. Instead of engaging with the journalist's attacks directly, he reframed the entire situation. Suddenly, Whitfield wasn't a critic exposing a fraud. He was a performer, failing to entertain an audience. As Freddie's improvised song continued, incorporating increasingly ridiculous rhymes about critics who can't create, the crowd began singing along. 3,000 people were participating in the public humiliation of the man who had come to humiliate their hero. But the most devastating moment was yet to come. When Freddie finished his impromptu composition, he stood and walked over to where Whitfield was standing, looking increasingly uncomfortable under the hostile gaze of 3,000 Queen fans. "Marcus," Freddie said softly but loud enough for his microphone to pick up, "I have a question for you." "What?" Whitfield replied weakly. "Do you think," Freddie continued, his voice building in power and theatricality, "that these beautiful people paid their hard-earned money to come here tonight and listen to you?" The question hung in the air like a sword about to fall. The crowd was completely silent, waiting for their hero to deliver what they sensed would be the killing blow. "Because I think," Freddie continued, beginning to pace around the increasingly nervous journalist, "they came here to escape from people exactly like you. People who tear down instead of building up. People who criticize instead of creating. People who think that being negative makes them intelligent." The audience erupted in approval, understanding that they were witnessing not just a comeback, but a philosophical statement about the role of art in society. But Freddie still wasn't finished. "You know what the difference is between you and me, Marcus?" he asked, stopping directly in front of the journalist. Whitfield whispered all, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "I make people happy," Freddie replied simply, "and you, well, you're just sad." The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 5 minutes, during which Marcus Whitfield stood on stage, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. But in a moment that demonstrated why Freddie Mercury was beloved not just as a performer but as a human being, he made one final gesture that elevated the entire incident from clever comeback to genuine class. "Now, Marcus," he said, as the applause finally died down, "I want you to understand something. You're not wrong that there's a lot of manufactured nonsense in the music industry. There absolutely is. But the solution isn't to tear down the people who are trying to create something beautiful. The solution is to support the artists who are doing it right." He walked over to his piano and picked up a set list, signing it with a flourish. "This is for you," he said, handing it to the stunned journalist. "Not because I agree with what you wrote, but because I believe that everyone deserves a chance to remember the night they learned something important about themselves." The crowd applauded again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the hostile laughter that had greeted Whitfield's attacks, but genuine appreciation for what they recognized as an act of unexpected grace. Security finally reached the stage and began to escort Whitfield away, but he paused at the edge of the platform. "Mr. Mercury," he called out, his voice barely audible. "Yes, love?" Freddie replied. I think I understand now," Whitfield said quietly. What happened after that night would become almost as legendary as the incident itself. Marcus Whitfield returned to London and wrote what many consider to be the most honest piece of music journalism ever published. Titled "The Night I Learned the Difference Between Criticism and Creation," it was a complete retraction of his previous attacks on Queen and a thoughtful analysis of his own motivations as a critic. "I went to that concert planning to expose what I thought was a fraud," he wrote. "Instead, I discovered that the fraud was me. I had spent years hiding my own creative failures behind a mask of cynical criticism, tearing down artists who had the courage to put themselves out there in ways I never could." The article became required reading in journalism schools across England and sparked a broader conversation about the responsibility of critics to be constructive rather than destructive. But perhaps more remarkably, Whitfield used the experience as a catalyst for his own creative awakening. He left music journalism and began writing fiction, eventually publishing several novels that drew critical acclaim for their honesty and emotional depth. In interviews years later, he would always credit that night at Manchester Apollo as the moment that changed his life. "Freddie Mercury could have destroyed me that night," he reflected in a 1995 interview. "He had every right to, and he certainly had the power to do it. Instead, he chose to teach me something about grace under pressure pressure, and the difference between creating and destroying. That lesson shaped everything I did afterward. The incident also had a profound impact on how other performers handled hostile situations. The Mercury method became a template studied by entertainers, public speakers, and even politicians for dealing with aggressive confrontations. Dr. Sarah Chen, who witnessed the entire event, later wrote a paper on what she termed constructive dominance in conflict resolution. What Freddie demonstrated was that the most powerful response to hostility isn't counter-hostility, but a combination of superior skill, psychological insight, and ultimately compassion. The bootleg recording of that night became one of the most treasured items in Queen's unofficial discography. Fans sought out the complete footage, not just for the musical performance, but for what many considered a masterclass in handling adversity with both strength and grace. Queen's management initially worried about the negative publicity the incident might generate, but reviews of the concert universally praised Freddie's handling of the situation. Critics noted that his response had demonstrated not just quick wit, but a deep understanding of human psychology and the power of performance to transform even the most negative situations into something positive. The Manchester Apollo concert became a turning point in how the music press approached Queen. Many journalists who had previously been dismissive began to reassess their opinions, recognizing that they had underestimated the depth and intelligence behind Freddie's theatrical persona. More importantly, the incident demonstrated to fans around the world that their hero wasn't just a great performer, but someone who could handle real-world challenges with the same creativity and grace he brought to his music. Brian May later reflected on the evening in his autobiography, writing, "That night, I saw a side of Freddie that even I hadn't fully appreciated. He didn't just defend himself against that attack, he transformed it into an opportunity to teach everyone in that room, including the attacker, something important about human dignity and the power of art to heal rather than harm." The setlist that Freddie signed for Marcus Whitfield was eventually donated to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, where it's displayed alongside a placard explaining the story of the night. A music journalist learned that the most powerful reviews are written not with words, but with actions. Today, the phrase "pulling a Whitfield" is still used in journalism circles to describe the act of letting personal bias override professional judgment, while doing a Mercury refers to responding to criticism with superior skill rather than defensive anger. The Manchester incident remains one of the most studied examples of how true professionals handle hostile situations, and film schools often use footage of that night to teach students about the power of charisma, quick thinking, and grace under pressure. If this story amazed you as much as it amazed that crowd in Manchester, smash that like button and share it with every music fan you know. What's the best comeback you've ever witnessed? Drop it in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible untold stories of rock's greatest legends. The magic of turning attacks into art continues here on our channel, where every story reminds us that the most powerful responses to negativity aren't about fighting back, they're about rising above.